Age of Sigmar has a lot of factions and it can be very difficult to decide which one to play, and so that's why I'm covering all of the factions in this video series to help you make the decision, should I play this faction? Today we're talking about the Gloomspite Gitz faction, a horde-style army that looks to put a lot of bodies on the board and to overwhelm their opponents. If you enjoy goblins, mushrooms, trolls, wolves, and even spiders, then Gloomspite Gitz might be the right pick for you. They are a versatile faction with a lot of different units and sub-faction choices. This is not the most beginner-friendly army because with the amount of units to choose from, there's a lot of different synergies that you have to keep track of and maximize. That being said, Gitz are a very popular faction, and that doesn't surprise me because goblins are awesome and Gitz are some of the raddest goblins I've ever seen. The plan for this video is to break down common questions about the faction, talk about the playstyle, the types of models, and how you might get started in the army, and more. To start the video off, we're going to be talking about the playstyle of the Gloomspite Gitz. This is a faction that is centered around goblins in many forms, as well as trolls and some funny red creatures called squigs. If you're wondering what I mean about goblins in many forms, I'm referring to the different sub-factions of goblins that you can run in this army. And technically, sub-factions aren't a thing anymore in Age of Sigmar, but I think it's a term that newer players are going to have an easier time understanding. Essentially, each sub-faction in Gloomspite Gitz has a keyword, and these keywords are going to provide access to different buffs and synergies within the faction. You won't play every single keyword or sub-faction of Gloomspite Gitz in one army list, but you will mix several types together, and perhaps the best way to start this video off is by covering these different keywords of the different units. First up, we have the Moon Clan, which is your regular goblins. These are the little guys with knives, bows, magic, and other fantastic weapons. They are generally pretty weak fighters, but come in large numbers, and a lot of heroes are going to fit into this category. Then we have the Spiderfang keyword, which covers all of your spider-riding goblins. This is a pretty old sub-faction, and it hasn't really received much support in the way of new units, and so you just won't see it as often in games. It's unclear if this sub-faction will get updated eventually or if it will go to Legends in the future, but it is safe to play Spiderfang for the rest of 4th edition. Squigs are wild little creatures that grow in various shapes and sizes. They are bright red and they are generally very aggressive and hungry. Goblins will ride squigs into battle, but they must be careful that they don't become the next meal for their mount. Squigs are very hard to control, and so you will see that their movement characteristic is something that you actually have to roll for in order to see how much you can move each turn. Troggoth is the Warhammer word for troll. These big lumbering creatures are some of the most powerful Gloomspite Gitz units, but also the most expensive. Troggoths can heal themselves and have the potential to deal big damage. They are a very popular archetype with Gitz players. The Git Mob is the newest addition to the Gloomspite Gitz faction, but really they are a blast from the past. Wolf Riders are a long-time unit from the Warhammer Fantasy Battle game, and now they are back in Age of Sigmar with some glorious brand new models. These wolf units are fast, and they open up a very techy and speedy playstyle for Gloomspite Gitz. Now that you know all of the Gloomspite Gitz keywords, we can talk a little bit about the faction abilities. Another thing that I should mention about goblins in Warhammer universe is that they worship the Bad Moon. This is a crazy celestial rock that appears randomly and has a very creepy face. When it appears, it empowers the goblins, and this is a core of the battle trait for Gloomspite Gitz. Whenever you play a game of Age of Sigmar with Gloomspite Gitz, the Bad Moon is going to show up, and it's going to show its face in a bunch of different ways. It could be grinning, scowling, sulking, or cackling. Depending on what the face is doing, different sub-factions are going to get different buffs. Think about the Bad Moon as having 4 stages, and every turn it's going to rotate to the next stage. And that means that on some turns, some of your models will be more powerful than others, making timing very important. So for example, when you have the Bad Moon cackling or grinning, it's going to add 5 to the control scores of friendly non-squig Moon Clan units. But if it's cackling and grinning, then it's going to give a combat buff to Spiderfang units and their companion weapons. When it's grinning or scowling, it's going to subtract 1 from the rend of combat attacks that target your Troggoth units. And when it's scowling or sulking, it's going to then make the squig movement a little bit more dependable. If it's sulking and cackling, then friendly Git Mob units are going to be able to charge and shoot even if they used a retreat in the same turn. That's a lot of information, but really it just buffs up different parts of your faction at different times. There are a few ways to interact with the Bad Moon to help navigate to the faces that you were hoping to buff your army. Any Gloomspite Gitz wizard can cast a spell that has a chance to move the moon to the next face, or even let you pick a face of your choosing, but the spell also has a chance to do nothing. With spell casting being a big investment in Warhammer, it's really rough to have a spell do nothing even after you've successfully cast it and your opponent wasn't able to unbind it, and that makes it really hard to depend on this spell. Squig the Loon King is a named character for Gloomspite Gitz, and he has the ability to make the Bad Moon stay on a particular face for an extra turn, but he can only do it one time per game. It makes bringing him in your army list very interesting, as he can secure a specific synergy in a clutch part of the game. The Gloomspite Gitz also have a faction terrain piece called the Bad Moon Loon Shrine, and at the end of each of your turns, this terrain piece is going to revive a non-hero, non-monster, non-war machine Gloomspite Gitz unit that has been destroyed during the battle at half strength. This is going to give you a bit of recursion to factor into your game plan, and it's a really nice piece given that most of your units are on the weaker side, they're likely to die, and then you can bring them back to life. This faction has a lot of different unit types to utilize, ranging from infantry to cavalry to monsters and war machines. There's a bit of everything in this faction. The faction also features some solid wizards, and it has 2 different spell lores right now. While the spell lores have some interesting options, overall they aren't the most impactful spell lores. Some of the standout spells include teleporting friendly units and allowing your Gitz units to retreat in the hero phase, which give you more flexibility during the movement phase. Unfortunately, those 2 spells I just mentioned aren't in the same spell lore, so you can't go ultra move techie with them both. Because of the massive variety in this faction, the playstyle can be quite versatile. This means a Gloomspite Gitz player that grows their collection will have access to different experiences on the table without ever having to switch to a different faction. When you build your army list, you're going to be able to pick a battle formation that will allow you to focus your game plan. Let's take a look at the options available to Gloomspite Gitz players. The first option will give 3 Moon Clan or Spiderfang units until an end of turn movement ability that also deals damage to the enemy that's in combat with them. The second one will allow your Troggoths to heal D3 every time they fight. The third one is for Squigs. Whenever they charge, they get extra attacks on some of their weapons. And the fourth one is for Git Mob. You pick a unit that's in combat, they get to retreat without taking any damage and move through enemy units, which normally you can't do, and then deal D3 damage to the enemy that they retreated from. There are 2 more battle formations that we're not going to talk about in this video, as they are seasonal rules and they're going to go away next summer. The intent for this video is for viewers to be able to watch it over the course of 4th edition, and so I don't want to show a rule that may or may not be available later on in the edition's lifespan. But if you are interested right now in learning about the seasonal rules, then you can check out the Warhammer app, or you can go to the Warhammer community download section. Next, we're going to take a look at the model range for Gloomspite Gitz, and they have quite a bit of models available for you to play as. There's 16 hero units and 22 non-hero units. So let's take a look now at every single model that you can look forward to building, painting, and playing if you play Gloomspite Gitz. First up, we'll talk about some of the heroes, including Drogs da Sunchompa, who is a brand new hero for this edition. It is a cavalry hero that brings a lot of synergy to the Git Mob side of the army. He can chain fight with the Git Mob units and also allow them to make an additional move into combat. His passive reduces the hit chance of enemy units that are near him and prevents them from using the all-out attack command. The Snarl Boss is another cavalry hero that gives a charge roll bonus for Git Mob cavalry and also can buff the power of wolves that the Git Mob ride into battle. The Frazzle Git Shaman on War Wheela is a pretty rare type of hero. It's a war machine hero, but this is really just the main wizard option that still gets the Git Mob synergy and keyword. This hero can also prevent shooting attacks from targeting your units that are close to it, and it can dole out some damage to nearby enemy units during the shooting phase. Finally, for the Git Mob, we have the Snarl Boss on War Wheela, which is another Git Mob war machine hero. He can chain fight with the Sunstila Wheelas, which we're going to talk about later, and this hero can also move out of combat in the movement phase, dealing damage to enemy infantry that it passes by. It also has a great once per battle ability to increase the movement and provide some additional protection if needed. Moving on to the non-hero Git mob units, we have the Snarlfang Riders, which are a cavalry unit of 5 that have some ranged attacks. They can also make a d6 movement every turn in the enemy movement phase, making them harder to catch and to pin into combat. We also have the Snarlpack Cavalry, which are a bigger version of the Snarlfang Riders with more health and better armor. They have no ranged attack, but they get great bonuses when they do charge, including strike first and increased control. The Doom Diver Catapult is a war machine with some pretty nice random damage, but for every miss that you roll, you can actually re-roll it but lose 1 point of rend. It means that when you're shooting at low save targets, you have a pretty good chance of rolling some hits because you can afford to lose that rend. The Sunstila Wheelas are war machines that have a movement ability similar to the hero version, where they can move out of combat for free in the movement phase. However, in a recent buff, we've seen that they now can do that in any movement phase, making the Sunstila Wheelas incredibly hard to pin down, as they can just move out of combat on your opponent's turn and pin people deep in their territory. It provides a lot of utility to harass the enemy and is something that we're not sure if it's going to get changed or not eventually. The Wolf Git Retinue is another Git mob cavalry unit that is going to give a 5-up award for a Snarl boss and itself when they stick close together, and this makes them a power pair with extra survivability. Next, we'll talk about the Squig and Moon Clan heroes, as there's a lot of crossover here. And first up, we have the Squig boss with the Nasha Squig, and that is a helpful buff piece for Squigs, giving nearby Squigs either extra movement or a powerful crit mortals buff. We also have the Fungoid Cave Shaman, which is a basic wizard on foot that can increase its power level by 1 once per game, giving it an extra spell cast that turn. We have the Loon Boss, which is a basic goblin foot hero. He can chain fight with Moon Clan infantry units and can buff Moon Clan Stabbas with some extra power by giving them a 2 wound buff, or they can revive some goblins back to life if the unit is out of combat. We also have the Rabble Rouser, which is a very interesting foot hero that can deep strike and appear anywhere on the battlefield on a turn of your choosing. But once it's on the field, you can pick a friendly beast or monster and it will start to taunt it. The taunted unit can run and charge, giving it extra mobility, but it has to move towards the Rabble Rouser. If it catches that Rabble Rouser, it deals damage to it. So basically it's a little goblin that is going to annoy your trolls or your squigs, and it's going to give you extra mobility, but if it ever catches up to it, it could die. Squig, the Loon King, is the big named character for Gloomspite Gitz. Once per battle, he can make the bad moon not switch faces, which is very helpful. He can also hand out free redeploy commands to friendly Moon Clan units. On top of these abilities, he's also a wizard too that has a unique warscroll spell that can deal direct damage to an enemy unit. He's right now one of the most powerful units you can put into your army, and a lot of people are playing him. We also have the Loon Boss on Mangler Squigs, which is a monster hero that wants to get into combat, and it damages enemies as it charges into them. It also deals damage to enemies even when it dies, as it thrashes about on the battlefield. Once per battle, this hero can buff the hit chance for friendly Squigs, making for a very powerful go turn if you can set it up correctly. Now we'll talk about the non-hero Squigs and Moon Clan. So we have the Squig Hoppers, which are a 10 model cavalry unit that can deal damage to enemies they pass across. And like all Squigs, their movement isn't at all guaranteed. You do have to roll for it, but they have the fly keyword so they can jump over things and move across units easily. We have the Boingrot Bounders Squigs, which are a 5 model cavalry unit that do impact damage to anybody that they charge into. They also have that fly keyword so they can charge over units to get into your your softer units that your enemy's trying to protect or screen against you. We then have the Mangler Squig, which is the monster version of the hero that we saw earlier, and it has that fly keyword. It deals damage to surrounding enemies upon death, just like that hero version, but it can also make a bonus movement in the charge phase after it charged to get into preferred combat targets if possible. We then have the Squig Herd, which is a unit of 12 Squigs, and when they die, they have a chance to deal damage back to the enemy. They also come with Squig Herder models that can revive slain Squigs back to the unit at the cost of their own lives. The Gabapalooza is a very interesting 5 model infantry unit that has the unique ability to either buff a Gloomspite unit or debuff an enemy. It's also one of the rare non-hero wizard units in the game, giving it a ton of utility. The unit also starts off with a Ward 4, which gradually gets worse as the game progresses, but it's a very powerful defensive buff. The Loon Smasher Fanatics are a 5 model infantry unit that can be deployed off the table and then deep strike onto the battlefield later. The restrictions are that it has to come into play near a Moonclad Clan Stabas or Shootas unit. This unit always has strike first, but it's not going to survive very long in combat. The Moonclan Shootas are one of the basic goblin infantry choices. They come in 20 models per unit, and so if you reinforce them, that's going to be 40 goblins. They have an 18-inch shot, but it's really not that effective because there's not a ton of ways that you can buff their shooting. But they are very cheap and you can use them as a screen effectively, and they also have an ability to roll a dice and reduce the hit chance of any unit that is in combat with them. The Moonclan Stabas are very similar to the Shootas, but they come with more of a melee focus. They don't have a ranged attack. They still come in those units of 20 and can be reinforced to units of 40. They have a few more ways to get buffed compared to the Shootas, but they're still mainly a screen unit to block your opponent. The Sneaky Snufflers are a 6 model infantry unit that can give a ward roll to a friendly Moonclan unit and possibly even boost their number of attacks, but you have to roll well. Really, the best part about the Sneaky Snufflers is that their name is Sneaky Snufflers. The Spore Splatter Fanatics are a 5 model infantry unit. They can move in the deployment phase, which gives you some extra tactical reach before the game even begins. And that is very relevant if you're new to Age of Sigmar. That means you could possibly take an objective before the game begins. This unit can add to the melee attacks of friendly units within 12 inches and reduce the number of attacks for the enemy units that are in combat with them, which is just 3 inches. Both of these are very powerful effects, and it means that you can really power up your army by giving them more attacks and also by decreasing attacks from your opponent. But the problem is that they only have 5 health total on the worst possible save, and so they're just not going to survive very long. Next, I'm going to talk about the Troggoth heroes. First, we have the Dankhold Trogboss, which is a monster hero that can ignore enemy spells on a 4-up dice roll. It heals at the start of every turn, as any good troll should do, and finally it can buff the attacks of nearby Troggoth units with a successful dice roll. If you haven't figured it out yet, Gloomspite Gitz has a lot of rolling dice just to get your basic buffs, etc. So I hope that if you pick this faction, you are really good at rolling dice. Next up we have Trugg, the Troggoth King, which is another named character for the Gloomspite Gitz faction. He also heals every turn and can outright slay a model each turn. One of the main draws of Trugg is his magical laystone attached to his back. This gives random effects based on what you roll. Haha, you know, more rolls. So some of these effects will boost the offensive power of nearby Troggoths. Some effects are going to be more defensive. I should warn you that there is a chance that you can deal damage to Trugg, but you'd have to roll triple ones just to do that. It's super unlikely. If I were to ever try, I'd definitely be the one to succeed there. We can also talk about Kragnos here. He's not a Troggoth unit, but he would often be run with Troggoth units. So Kragnos, the End of Empires, is a named character and a monster hero that can be taken in any destruction army. So that includes Gloomspite Gitz. He has a ton of very strong abilities and even stronger attacks, but he'll cost over a quarter of your army points just to bring him. He can ignore spells, he can deal instant damage on the charge, but most importantly, he can give extra dice to charge for your friendly units. So having a 3d6 charge rather than a 2d6 charge is quite strong, especially for, say, a Troggoth list, where you need to get them into combat and swinging their big clubs and fists. Moving along to the non-hero Troggoth units, we have the Dankhold Troggoth, which is the non-hero version of the Trogboss. This is a large monster unit that is capable of dealing a lot of damage. It can heal every turn and it has magical resistance. And this troll can also do an additional move in the combat phase, and when it does, it deals damage to enemy units. The Fellwater Troggoths are a unit of 3 small trolls, and they heal every turn automatically. They can also shoot Noxious Vomit in the shooting phase. It only has a 6-inch range, but they can shoot into combat, and they also will put a reduction on their opponent's save roll if they damage them. We also have the Rock Gut Troggoths, which are a unit of 3 smaller trolls, and they have pretty decent damage and they can heal every turn. Big surprise. They also have an innate 5-up ward for extra defense, which is honestly really huge and a big reason why you'll see a lot of Rock Gut Troggoths on these army lists. The final group of units to talk about are the Spiderfang units, and we have a couple of heroes, including the Web Spinner Shaman on the Arachnarok Spider, which is a level 1 wizard riding a monster spider. It buffs the casting rolls of the Spiderfang wizards that are nearby, and it can ensnare enemy infantry heroes, giving them strike last for the turn. It can also move over terrain as if it were flying, which is a very cool ability, and it makes sense because it is a spider. We also just have the regular web spinner shaman, which is a on-foot wizard with the Spiderfang subfaction. It is essentially a goblin Spider-Man, as the web spinner shaman can sling to other spiders or terrain features and move great distances. The web spinner shaman also has a unique spell that gives a Spiderfang unit the ability to run and still charge and shoot. As for the non-hero units, we have the Skitterstrand Arachnarok, which is a monster spider that can be set up into Deep Strike and then move onto the battlefield on a future turn. During the combat phase, it has the ability to move over units and deal damage to a target. It's suitable for a big terrifying spider. The Spider Riders are a cavalry unit with 5 models. They have some ranged attacks, and they can also move over terrain as if they had flying, but otherwise they're pretty unremarkable. We also have the Arachnarok Spider with Flinger, which is a spider monster with a War Machine ranged weapon that's attached to it. And anyone that gets hit by this weapon will have the chance to reduce their movement. And this unit also has a anti-charge ability. And then finally, we have the Arachnarok Spider with the Spiderfang War Party. And this is another spider monster with a big spider bow ranged attack and some big melee attacks. It can also damage 3 units every charge phase with a special ability. I'm not going to do a deep dive into the lore of Gloomspite Gitz in this video, but I am going to talk a little bit about how their rules on the tabletop will represent their lore. So the trolls and the big spiders aside, this is a faction of small creatures, and these goblins are known to be conniving and tricky, but they have no love of fighting anyone that is stronger than themselves. They are cowards, and rightfully so. They are weak creatures, and this is represented in their stats, as we are going to see later on in this video. And this has led the Gloomspite Gitz led them to look for strength in others, and this means using squigs, trolls, and spiders. All of these options bear risks, as many goblins are killed working with these allies. But the Gloomspite Gitz know they must strike at the opportune time, and that is why they try as hard as they do to foretell the bad moon's appearance. However, it is not easily predictable, even if it can even be predicted at all. And this is represented in this cycle of the moon in the army rules. Depending on how the moon presents, the iron will be hot for certain subsections of the army to strike. But this uncertainty, while lore accurate, can kind of be frustrating to play on the tabletop, as many other Age of Sigmar factions just have way more consistent ways to use their faction rules. The Gloomspite Gitz are on the easier side of the spectrum of factions to paint, and depending on your army choice, you're going to have a very large volume of painting to do, which can be difficult in itself, but as a destruction faction, you don't have to worry about the models being as clean as in other factions. It is understood that these goblins are living in dark and dank spaces. They have makeshift equipment, and it would be no surprise to anybody to see bloodstains on any of it. Creatures like trolls, squigs, and wolves will have great dry brush areas and singular colors that you can use, and most goblins can be done in just a few colors as well. However, I always like to clarify that any army can be taken to some pretty extreme levels of detail. A local painter in my area has some of the nicest painted models I've ever seen in my time in the hobby, and they're all Gloomspite Gitz models. The newer Git mob models in particular have a lot of details to paint up, and they will be a good challenge for any aspiring painter. And when you look at some of the different mushrooms that are on all the various models that you can paint on the goblins and the trolls, there's a lot of flexibility to use different and interesting colors to augment your color scheme. Next, we're going to talk about the army size for this faction and whether or not it is a elite or horde army. And the Gloomspite Gitz at their heart are a horde faction. You can run swaths of Moonclan goblins and squigs to flow over the board, bringing back dead goblins with your Loon Shrine. There is an elite build for this army that would involve running a Trog heavy list, but even then you're going to have some horde elements, or at least some goblin wizards that are supporting your trolls. So if you decide to play the Gloomspite Gitz, then be prepared to paint a lot of miniatures and have a bigger army size than some of the other factions. Next, we're going to take a look at the price of a Gloomspite Gitz army, and these are always estimates as points can change, which means that you might be able to fit more or less models into your army, which will change the price of the army. The estimation also includes buying faction terrain and manifestations, and while you can get by without manifestations if you really want to, the faction terrain for Gloomspite Gitz is pretty important, so you're going to want to get that. Luckily, there are a lot of great value boxes that you can start with for Gloomspite Gitz, and it's going to save you a lot of money, and I actually think it's kind of necessary, more so than any other army list that I've ever looked at for these videos that I'm making here. So let's take a look. First off, we have the brand new spearhead, the newer spearhead at least, which is the Gitmob one, and that costs $180 Canadian, and you get a Snarl Boss, you get the 2 of the Wolf Git retinue, you get the Sunsteel Wheelas, and you get the Snarl Pack Cavalry, and this spearhead is 510 points of Gitmob, which is about a quarter of a full army. And so if you buy this box, you will be able to play it in the Spearhead game mode before you build up to 2,000 points. It's a fine purchase as long as you are actually interested in the Gitmob side. You might be interested in playing Gitmob if you like the idea of a very fast army with movement tricks. I think this would be the right call for you, and you could possibly even buy multiple of these if you really wanted to build up those Sunsteel Wheelas, because they are looking pretty good right now. Otherwise, we have the older spearhead, which is like your traditional one. It comes with a Loon Boss, 3 Rockgut Troggoths, 10 Squig Hoppers, which you could build as Boingrot Bounders, and then 20 Moonclan Stabbas, which you could also build as Moonclan Shootas. And so this spearhead gives you 650 points towards a full army, and it can be used in the spearhead mode. It's a great way to dive into the goblins, the Squigs, and the Troggoths, and it can be combined with other boxes that we've already spoken about, although you will have quite a split of archetypes. This also could be a box that you buy multiple of if you want a horde of goblins. It's going to get you to your first reinforced unit of Stabbas or Shootas. I don't know if you need that second Loon Boss, but everything else in this box could be used twice. You definitely want more Rockgut Troggoths, and the Squig Hoppers, you can either get another 10 or you can get 10 Boingrot Bounders, or you can reinforce like either one of them. And so if you want the classic goblin experience, then I think this box is going to be a really good one to buy, as it has your horde of goblins. It has these creatures that they've finessed into helping them. Just this week, we had the Battle Force box announced for the Gloomspite Gitz, and it's going to be a Troggoth themed box. It's going to be around $290 Canadian. I'm estimating, I hope I'm wrong, but I think that's where it's going to be at. And so this is going to get you Trug the Troggoth King. It's going to get you a Dankhold Trog Boss, which could be built as a Dankhold Troggoth, 6 Rockgut Troggoths, 3 Fellwater Troggoths, and at the time of recording, this is 1,130 points, which is over half of what you'd need to start a new Gloomspite Gitz army. It's really good value. It's a great start for somebody that's really interested in trolls as the centerpiece of their army. And if you bought this and the old spearhead with all the goblins, then you're going to be really close to having a full army, and you would just need to add a couple of wizards to get to 2,000, and you'd be looking at doing that for a pretty reasonable price. Really, it's going to add up as we take a look at later. And then finally, there's still a lot of army boxes on the on the various websites that you can look for. And so the army box came out when the battletome came out. It has a Gitmob theme, so you get Drogs the Sun Champa, you get 6 Snarl Pack Cavalry, and you also get the Sunsteel Wheelas. This also comes with a special edition battletome with like a special cover, and then warscroll cards for the faction, and those are both really nice to get as a new player, and that makes it very helpful. It's going to be a great way to get into the Gitmob part of the army, and you can stack this with the Gitmob spearhead for just a full like 1,000 points of Gitmob, and that's half your list right there. And then you can just add the other half to kind of supplement it with a bunch of other things like your wizards and your various goblins or your squigs or trogs, whatever it is that you want. So now when we put it all together, I went online and I started looking at Gloomspite Gitz army lists that people were posting online that they said they were using in tournaments, and I started kind of taking stock of what the prices looked like, and it was pretty dire. If you were to go the route of like, hey, there's a tournament list, I want to make that list. And the reason is that the Gloomspite Gitz are a horde army, and they can fit a lot of models into their army list. And that means that you're going to actually run a lot of reinforced units as well. And for every reinforced unit, you're buying 2 boxes of those models. And so when I put together a price for example, I'm looking at a list right now that is a Troggoth and a Gitmob list with a little bit of support from like the Moonclan side and like Squig stuff. This list was $1,369.50 Canadian. And usually when I make these videos, the price that I get is around $900 to $1,000 Canadian. And so this is like a full like $300 to $400 more than most of the other videos that I've made in this series. And it's just because there's so many extra boxes here. This does include buying the Endless Spells and the Loom Shrine, and you can always go to friendly local gaming stores because they're going to give you, some sort of discount. They're allowed to do that. And I also recommend that you look at doing things like buying used models. And there's a couple of Canadian sites that I've been using to buy used models. I do really like building models. I prefer that. But at the end of the day, if I've already built something a few times, maybe I'll just buy a used version when I'm getting more of it, because you can save a ton of money that way. Next, we're going to talk about the general stats that you might see in this faction. I'm discussing averages here. So what I might say won't hold true for every specific unit in every single group, but it's just going to give you a general idea of what these groups of units do and what you can expect if you get into this faction. Starting with the offensive stats. Your average goblin stat line is going to be hitting on 4s and wounding on 5s, which is a really terrible stat line. Even if it can be augmented at times, you're working from a really bad place. You're attacking in larger volumes, and that always is going to help, but at the end of the day, this does represent how weak goblins are. Your beasts, like your wolves and your squigs, are generally going to be a 4-up to hit and a 3-up to wound, which is better, but it's still rough on that hit stat, although we saw there were some ways to buff the squigs that were good, and also the wolves get some buffs as well. So that there is also a way to make squigs have just more attacks, and more volume is actually a really good way to increase your damage. And you can add rend to the Git mob wolves. So really, we're talking about wanting to get all these buffs online to get the most out of your units. The monsters like Troggoths and some squigs that are monsters as well, like the Mangler ones, will have your classic 4+ to hit and 2+ to wound, which is a very standard monster stat line, and they generally do more damage, have higher rend. Some heroes are going to have nicer stats, but even then, most goblin heroes are hitting and wounding on 4s. But really, goblin heroes don't want to be fighting anyway unless they're on some kind of mount. This army is very, very low on the rend stat. Like, most units don't even have rend at all. There aren't a lot of anti-X abilities either to give you situational rend, and so most of the rend that you're going to see is going to be on heroes and Troggoths, making Troggoths the clear way to deal a lot of damage with this army. And if you're not running Troggoths, then the damage for this army is going to come from volume of attacks that you can make and mortal damage from a bunch of different spells and abilities. And there's been so many spells and abilities that do like D3 here, D3 there. So at the end of the day, Gloomspite Gitz, from my perspective, aren't looking to table their opponents. They are instead using their hordes and techie movement to score well and control the board. When we talk about defense for this faction, the bigger Troggoths, the war machines, some of your Git mob and spider heroes are going to have a 4-up save. The Troggoths are going to heal every turn, so managing defensive buffs like all-out defense can be really important to survive a combat so that you can heal back some damage. And there's even that battle formation that lets you heal a Troggoth after they fight. And if you keep your Troggoths alive, then they're going to pay you back for every turn that they're in combat. So get them into combat, get them healing. And remember that the Bad Moon will also subtract 1 rend from the characteristic of combat attacks that target your Troggoth units when it's on a specific phase. The Rockgut Troggoths, as I mentioned, have that 4-up save and 5-up ward with 5 health, and so that makes them very dependable, and that's why we see them a lot. Moving on to the goblins and squigs, they mostly have a 6+ save. Some are 5-up. There's some other exceptions, but generally it's just not a very durable part of the faction. Goblins on average have 1 health, and much of your cavalry is on 2 health, which is below average for cavalry. So aside from specific heroes and a couple of select units, this is also not a very ward-heavy army, and it just means this is an army that's going to die easily, and that's fine. It's a horde army. It is not supposed to be tanky. Finally, we can talk about mobility. So your average goblin has 5-inch move, which is fine. That's the average move across the game. Squigs have to roll how far they can move, but generally they're going to have more movement than your goblins will because they just have a base that they add to the roll that's going to be further. And also, when that Bad Moon is scowling or sulking, you can take a 4-inch instead of the roll for the movement for squigs. Your Troggoths can move 6 inches, which is decent, and then your Git mob will move 12 inches, and they just have so many movement shenanigans besides, making them the fastest subfaction in the army, and they are able to do things like leave weave combat, jump over enemy units, and all sorts of other things. The spiders also have varying mobility and can get over the terrain like we talked about, and so that makes them a little bit more mobile as well. And so overall, given that this faction also has access to a teleport spell, it is a generally pretty mobile faction. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and it's going to help you decide whether or not Gloomspite Gitz is going to be your first or maybe just your next army that you are going to play. And Gloomspite veterans, let me know if I missed any information that you want to share with Gloomspite Gitz players. Hopefully I didn't get anything wrong. I did spend quite a bit of time looking into this video. It is such a gigantic faction. It's very hard to get it all concise and organized into a video that can give you the information quickly, but I did my best. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all soon in another video.